One of the great rivers of the Kailash, the official source of the Satluj, is the Rakshas Tal, the lake of the demons. The Satluj, running in ever deeper gorges, breaks through the Himalayas and into India near Chinni, east of the 23,000 feet high Rio Pargial. Here the crest of the great Himalaya passes southeastwards in an almost straight line, forming the northern watershed of the Baspa valley onto the pinnacles of the Gangotri group, Satopant and Chaukhamba, both 23,000ers, through the giant Nanda Devi, Nanda Kot and the Panchchuli groups, and onto the Api group of northwestern Nepal. An eastern extension of the Dhauladhar of the Lesser Himalaya forms the southern watershed of the Baspa valley, finally joining up with the Great Himalaya at the Chaukhamba Massif. Kinnaur is the valley of the Sutluj River, and unlike its western neighbour Spiti, is both far more accessible and varied in terms of terrain, climate, flora and fauna. In fact, Kinnaur, along the main 140-kilometre valley of the Satluj and in the side valleys of its tributaries, exhibits a unique gradation of all the main alpine topographical types, from the lower altitude temperate forests to the high altitude grasslands, and further onto the bleak moonscape of the Trans-Himalaya near the Shipkila. Etched along the gorge of the river Satluj is the famed Hindustan-Tibet road, which connects Shimla with Tibet via the Kinnaur Valley and Shipkila. Lower Kinnaur is a walker's delight. Starting from Sarahan in Simla district, you walk through vineyards and apple and apricot orchards with great mixed forests of deodar, moraina and rine pines, and of course oak, all wildly interspersed with wild rhododendrons which provide a splash of color. On the right bank of the river, the countryside is much wilder and contains bear, antelope and numerous exotic pheasants. Halfway through the Sutluj Valley, we enter the rain shadow zone. The terrain gets harsher and Buddhism mingles with Hinduism. Dominating the scenery is the Kinnaur Kailash Massif, its Trimurti of peaks, rearing up a few thousand meters from the river bank. The southern face of the Kinnaur Kailash range forms the backdrop to the incredibly picturesque Baspa Valley. The Baspa River starts near the Tibetan border and after carving out for itself an incredible valley, meets the Satluj at Karcham. In this valley there are walks through hops and saffron fields with meadows full of flowers and fruit trees. from the valley floor at 4,500 meters rise mountains of an unusual steepness of 6,500 meters height, offering exciting 2-3 day climbs of grassy base camps. One can also cross a number of passes to descend in the catchment of the Yamuna or the Tons. The flatness of the valley gives truth to the legend that it was once a lake. Unfortunately, the local legend is all set to come true once again. A huge multi-stage hydroelectric project has been sanctioned for the Baspa, thereby sealing the doom of the valley. An immense network of roads, housing colonies and ultimately the lakes will see the end of this acknowledgedly unique Himalayan ecosystem. The old Hindustan-Tibet road continues northeast up the Satluj and over the Shipkila Pass into Tibet. To the north is the Hangarang, or the valley of the Spiti. By far the largest tributary to join the Satluj is the Spiti, just short of the Indo-Tibetan border. Here stands the magnificent Pargial. At 23,000 feet, its sheer faces and crenellations make it the rock climber's ultimate ambition. Rising in a giant vertical 13,000-foot sweep from the gorge of the Satluj, Pargial dominates its surroundings and the minds of the people in the surrounding villages. The people of Kinnaur trace their tribal ancestry to the Kinnaurs, the pre-Aryan inhabitants of northern India, pushed into this remote extremity by the invading hordes. Since then, considerable intermingling has taken place, as other people have taken sanctuary here. For nearly 1,000 years, the Tibetan kingdom of Gugge held sway here. The people of Upper Kinnaur are consequently entirely Buddhist, and small monasteries dot all the villages. Lower and Middle Kinnaur is a fairly prosperous area. Apple and hops cultivation have paid rich dividends to the local farmers. The general pace of life is very relaxed, and they have a very rich brewing tradition. And some of the famous brews made in Kinnaur are made from apples, apricots, and grapes. All across the Western Himalayas, we come across village gods. Kullu, Parvati, Chamba, Lahore and Kinnaur each have their own village gods. Masks cast in gold, silver, bronze and brass, depending on the size of the village as also its wealth. In Kinnaur, the village god has 18 masks in each palanquin, covered with black yak hair jata. The village god controls the villagers as also directing social custom. Marriages and deaths are guided by the village god, and it is only the local deity who can allow the ingress of any stranger into the village. In Kinnaur, the village god also serves as the local bank, directing the temple bhandari or the storekeeper to give a loan of grain. The interest here is not paid in cash, but in kind, and the records of the loans given are kept on notched pieces of wood, which are destroyed once the loans are repaid. There is a custom in Kinnaur that the gods go to Indralok during winter and bring prosperity to their devotees. rituals are performed to mark the departure, and a few days later again to ceremoniously welcome the gods back. Upon the return of the god, the local chela or oracle relates the achievement of the village god in Indralok. In certain villages, during the absence of the god, the people more or less cease all normal activity and stay indoors as much as possible. The masks, or mohras as they are known, have been objects of fascination for scholars of all hues. The scholars, for example, have been able to reconstruct the history of Kullu Rajas through the inscriptions on such mohras. Skilled metalsmiths use centuries-old design as well as their own imagination to cast these unique and absolutely exquisite objects. True to its melting pot tradition, Kinnaur also has gods from the Tibetan tradition. These include Tungma and Milayung, who coexist peacefully with the many manifestations of Lord Shiva and the many relations of Hidamba, Bhim's consort, who are gods in Kinnaur. I think that this vast plethora of Himalayan gods is in large partly due to the general feeling of insignificance that the mountains impose on man. The higher up you go, the more insignificant seems man and all his creations. The architecture of Lower and Middle Kinnaur is very distinct and unique, and unlike anything that is seen in Spiti or Kullu. This is especially true of its temples. For example, the temple at Sarahan, with its disproportionately high lower story with very few and small windows, crowned by the temple proper, which overhangs the lower story and is of entirely wooden construction. Lower and Middle Kinnaur have the typical slate-roofed Pahari architecture that is common in areas with heavy snowfall. The clay-terraced flat-roof structures are more common in villages that are sticking to steep hillsides. These flat roofs are formed of wooden beams with birch bark, that's bhojpatra, which is waterproof, which is laid in layers over wooden plank and then covered with beaten earth. These areas become excellent spaces for drying wooden grains and for sunbathing on sunny days in winter. Upper Kinnaur reveals an evolution of architecture which is similar to Spiti. Massive walls, 2 to 3 feet thick, provide excellent temperature control. The ground story, as is traditional in all hill areas, is used for cattle, and the upper stories for dwelling. On the upper floors, room size and height are reduced further to conserve heat. And it is to a large extent the indigenous architecture which makes human dwelling possible in the Arctic temperatures of winter.
Meanwhile, purely administrative towns cast in the universal PWD mold have come up, like Rekongpyo, seat of the district administration and the only place in the valley that actually receives an electric supply, as opposed to just the connections. Development has come to Kinnaur, but unfortunately the local people don't seem to have much share in it, except as the usual road construction labor. Life for the local Kinnauris carries on pretty much as it has for centuries.
Lower Kinnaur contains one of the most scenic game sanctuaries in the country, the Rupi Bhaba Wildlife Sanctuary. In summer, a veritable paradise, the remote and little-known Upper Bhaba Valley contains both varieties of Himalayan bear, the only known herd of ibex outside Spiti, and numerous rare and exotic pheasants like the Western Tragopan. An amphitheater of peaks, ice fields and glaciers overlooks miles of lush meadows dotted with tiny alpine flowers. Some real picture postcard campsites make it worth the visit, even if one doesn't spot the extremely elusive Himalayan wildlife.
This little fellow is very cute as he forages through the forest, but a similar meeting with his larger brethren, especially his mum, is avoidable. Omnivorous with razor-sharp reaction speeds, he is unfortunately no match for the gun. For the locals, besides being a pest, for he raids crops and orchards, his bile and fat are highly prized in all sorts of medical quackery. Unfortunate to think that this little fellow could end up as the salve on the joints of some rheumatic old man. Thus, the Himalayan black bear has also found his way into the list of endangered species, a list that seems to grow longer by the day.
Some of the greatest mixed forests in the Himalayas are in the Upper Baspa Valley, home to many Himalayan species, including the bharal, or the blue sheep.
In looks, the bharal is a cross between a sheep and a goat, though much larger than either. An altitude-loving species, the bharal is found in Ladakh, Spiti, Upper Kinnaur, and on up to Bhutan, and usually at an altitude of over 4,000 meters. Preferring the alpine pastures, the typical habitat of the bharal is between the timberline and the snowline, browsing upon the rich diet of grasses, ferns, and dwarf shrubs. Major depredations into the bharal populations are made by local hunters in winter, when the animals are forced to descend to lower altitudes. This, the Western Horned Tragopan, is the rarest of the pheasant species in the Western Himalayas. Earlier found in a broad crescent down from Pakistan to the Garhwal region in UP, it now exists only in isolated pockets, the largest being in the Upper Beas and Kinnaur regions of Himachal.
A unique experiment has been launched here in Sarahan by the Himachal Pradesh Wildlife Department, that of breeding exotic pheasants in captivity which are endangered species. The chief beneficiary seems to be the Western Horned Tragopan, whose numbers have dwindled drastically in the wild, and so also the other species that are being bred in captivity here are the monal and the kala murga. Let's hope this project leads to an increase in their numbers ultimately in the wild.
We have a pheasant breeding center which was established in the year 1987-88, which is with the Sarahan Wildlife Division. This is basically a captive breeding cum rehabilitation center for the pheasants. We have successfully bred monal here, and till this year we have bred around 15 monals, and last year we bred Western Horned Tragopan also, which is a very rare pheasant. And this Western Horned Tragopan, the breeding of Western Horned Tragopan here is the first in the world. Initially there was an attempt in the Pakistan Zoo to breed this Western Horned Tragopan, but it was unsuccessful, and we rescued a pair of Western Horned Tragopan from the Tharjot area of the Dharan Ghati sanctuary, which is with this division, and that pair bred successfully this year and 2 chicks were hatched, but one of them died and one survived, and it is over a year old. We use broody hens here for hatching the chicks.
As with all pheasants, only the male monal has the gorgeous plumage, and this very beautiful gift of nature has proved to be the monal's bane. The crest of the male monal is prized as a hat ornament or kalgi throughout the Western Himalayas, and that has traditionally provided a fairly powerful economic incentive for the slaughter of this bird. In winter, they are also sold for the meat all over Kinnaur and the Kullu Valley. However, the most powerful threat to the monal and the other pheasants is habitat destruction. With the disappearance of the forest understory, time is fast running out for the monal.